Do people ever realize the moment they lose something irreplaceable? Not when it slips away quietly, but when their own arrogance blinds them so completely that they don't even see the hands that built their throne. I've often asked myself this question, not out of bitterness, but because life has a way of teaching us through silence. And trust me, silence can be louder than laughter. Before I begin, I want to thank you, whoever you are, for giving me your time. I know you could be anywhere right now, doing anything, but you chose to listen to my story. And if it's not too much to ask, would you mind sharing where you're from and what time it is there? Because as I tell the story, I want to picture you not as a stranger, but as someone sitting across from me, listening quietly, maybe holding a cup of tea. Just like I am. My name is Clara Evans. For 30 years, I gave my days, my patience, and my loyalty to a company that became more of a family than the one I had at home. I started as a receptionist, young, nervous, but hungry to learn. Through sheer will and long nights, I rose through the ranks, one careful decision at a time, until I was a senior operations head. People said, "Clara, this place would fall apart without you." And I used to smile and say, "No one is irreplaceable." It turns out I was wrong, but not in the way I thought. It all began to change the day a young man walked into our glass building, all sharp suits, confidence, and shiny new ideas. His name was Ryan Langford, the new CEO, barely in his 30s. He was the son of the company's late founder's friend, and he arrived with that modern arrogance, the kind that doesn't listen, only assumes. He greeted everyone like a celebrity greeting fans. When he shook my hand, he smiled, that polite, practiced kind of smile, and said, "Oh, you must be Mrs. Evans. I've heard you've been running the place forever." Forever. That word stuck with me. It wasn't admiration, it was dismissal, wrapped in politeness. At first, I tried to adapt. He changed everything overnight, new systems, new slogans, endless innovation meetings. But behind the buzzwords, I could see what he didn't: chaos. Decades of tested structure replaced with impulsive brilliance that looked good in meetings, but bled money in reality. I offered advice, gently, never to prove him wrong, just to protect the company we both claimed to love. He would smile and nod, then turn to his assistant and whisper, "Old habits die hard." And the room would laugh. That laughter, I can still hear it. I remember one morning, the air outside smelled of rain. I was in the boardroom, presenting the quarterly report. Ryan interrupted halfway through. "Clara," he said, leaning back in his chair, "these methods of yours worked in your time. But this is a new era. You've done your part, and we appreciate that. But maybe it's time for new blood to lead." The room went quiet. My hand froze mid-sentence. Every eye turned toward me, some sympathetic, some relieved. He smiled again. "Don't take it personally. Change is good." I looked around at the faces, people I had trained, defended, even covered for, and none of them spoke. That silence was my answer. I closed my file, nodded, and said softly, "You're right. Change is good." Then I walked out. No tears, no argument, no begging. Just quiet steps echoing through the corridor. As I reached the elevator, I heard laughter, not cruel, but thoughtless. It still cut the same when I got home that night. I didn't cry. I made tea, sat by the window, and stared at the city lights reflecting off the rain. For the first time in 30 years, I didn't have a single email to answer, a single deadline to meet. It was both freeing and terrifying. The next morning, I received a message from HR, formal, distant, thanking me for my years of dedication. They offered a farewell dinner. I declined. There were some goodbyes that don't need applause. In the weeks that followed, I wandered between memories and silence. I thought maybe I'd rest for a while, perhaps travel, perhaps bake, perhaps breathe. But people like me, we don't know how to stop building. It's in our blood. So I started small, just consulting, one client, then another. Word spread. Old colleagues, now working elsewhere, reached out for advice. One even said, "Clara, we miss your kind of order." I smiled quietly and moved on. It wasn't about revenge. It was about rediscovering myself outside the walls I'd once built for someone else. Months passed. Every time I walked past the tall glass building where I once worked, I'd see Ryan's glossy posters, bold slogans, empty promises. Inside, I'd catch glimpses of young faces rushing, anxious, lost. The company looked alive, but something in its heartbeat had changed. It wasn't the same. One evening, I ran into Hannah, a young woman who had once worked under me. She looked tired. We met at a small cafe. She hugged me tightly and whispered, "It's not the same without you. Things are falling apart, Clara." I just smiled. Everything that's built on pride eventually cracks, I said. She looked at me, almost frightened. You sound like you knew this would happen. I didn't answer. Some lessons are better left unspoken. That night, as I walked home under the dim streetlights, a strange peace washed over me. Not because I wanted Ryan to fail, but because I knew time has its own way of returning balance. You don't have to fight the storm. You just have to outlast it. And so I waited, quietly, patiently, while the world that once laughed started whispering my name again. Asterisk, it's strange how life doesn't always shout when it changes direction. Sometimes it whispers, softly enough that only those who've truly lived can hear it. And in those whispers, the truth begins to grow like roots spreading silently beneath the ground. Months had passed since I walked away from the glass building that had once felt like home. The first few weeks were hard, I won't lie. There were mornings I woke up before sunrise, instinctively reaching for my phone, half expecting an urgent message, a missed call, a problem only I could fix. But there was nothing, just silence. And at first, that silence felt cruel. Then, it began to feel like peace, while I adjusted to my new rhythm. Ryan Langford was living his golden moment. Magazines called him the young visionary. His face appeared in glossy interviews and leadership podcasts. He spoke about transforming legacy systems and redefining corporate culture. He used words I once edited for clarity, now spoken as if he invented them. People loved his confidence, his sparkle. They didn't see what I had seen behind that shine, the impatience, the hollow certainty, the fear of being ordinary. One day, an old colleague, Hannah, called again. Her voice was low, careful. Clara, she said, I don't know if you've heard, but things aren't good. What happened? I asked, though part of me already knew. 3 major clients have pulled out. Deliveries delayed. Budget's a mess. He keeps blaming the old system, but we all know it's not the system. I sipped my tea and smiled quietly. Let him learn, I said. But he won't listen to anyone, she sighed. He surrounded himself with people who just agree. That's how empires fall, I whispered. And I meant it. By the time autumn rolled in, whispers had turned to rumors. The company that once sparkled in headlines was starting to appear in quiet news columns, with words like instability and restructuring, but I stayed out of it. I didn't gossip, didn't celebrate. I just watched. Meanwhile, my own consulting work began to grow in a way I hadn't planned. Small local businesses, the mid-sized companies, started asking me to guide their operations. The same things I had once done for free inside that building. The irony wasn't lost on me. Every mistake Ryan made only sent more clients my way. They wanted order, not noise. Steadiness, not slogans. One evening, as I finished a late meeting, I saw a message waiting for me. It was from Mr. Carter, a former board member from my old company. He was one of those old-school gentlemen who never wasted words. His message was simple. Clara, I think it's time we talked. The next morning, we met at a quiet cafe. The kind where the smell of coffee lingers in the wood. He looked older than I remembered, his tie slightly loosened, his expression tired. Clara, he began softly, we made a mistake. I didn't reply. He sighed. Ryan's reckless. The board's in chaos. Half the staff have quit. We're bleeding money, we need stability. I stirred my coffee slowly. Why tell me? Because you were the stability. Clara, we see that now. You were the reason it worked for so long. His words should have felt like justice, but instead, they felt heavy. I didn't want revenge. I wanted peace. He leaned forward, lowering his voice. Ryan's ego is killing us. But if someone like you, could return even as a consultant, we might salvage what's left. I looked at him and said quietly, does Ryan know about this conversation? He shook his head. Not yet. But he'll find out soon enough, I smiled. Then I'll wait for him to call. Days passed. Then, late one evening, as the rain tapped gently on my window, I got another message, this time from Ryan himself. Short, formal, Mrs. Evans, I'd like to meet. Urgent matter. Please name the time. I stared at it for a while before replying. Tomorrow, 10 a.m. my office. My office, not his. And that difference, that tiny detail, carried a lifetime of balance. When he walked into my space the next morning, he looked different. The charm was still there, but the edges were cracked. Dark circles under his eyes, tension in his jaw, the shine of certainty replaced by exhaustion. He greeted me politely, almost too politely. Clara, he said, you look well. I am, I replied. You look busy. He gave a tight smile. That's one word for it. He sat across from me, glancing around the room, the plans, the books. The quiet order of it all. For the first time, he looked unsure. I won't waste your time, he said finally. Things aren't good. Our investors are pulling out. The last two projects failed. We're losing ground fast, I see. He hesitated, searching for the right words. I may have underestimated your systems, your discipline. That's a kind way to say it, I said softly. He looked down. I need your help, Clara. The company needs your help. The air between us hung heavy with irony. The same man who once dismissed me as old blood now sitting in front of me, asking for rescue. But I didn't gloat. I just watched him. He continued, I know I said some things. Things I shouldn't have. But we both care about that place. You built it and I destroyed it, I said gently, finishing his sentence. He looked up, pain flickering in his eyes. Will you help us? He asked finally. I leaned back in my chair. You know, Ryan, I said slowly, the day I walked away, you laughed. The board laughed. Everyone thought I was finished. But life has a funny way of remembering who did the real work. He swallowed hard, saying nothing. I didn't answer him that day. Instead, I gave him one condition. If I return, I don't work for you. I work with you. Equal ground. My name goes on every decision. He nodded immediately. Too quickly. Of course, he said, desperate. When he left, I sat there for a long time, watching the door close behind him. My hands were steady, my heart calm. Not revenge, not pride, just balance returning to its rightful place. The next week, I walked back into the same building where I had once been humiliated. The halls felt smaller somehow. The air carried a nervous energy, whispers, curious eyes. Some people smiled awkwardly when they saw me. Others looked away, pretending to type. Ryan walked beside me, his tone overly polite. This way, Mrs. Evans, he said, opening the conference room door. Inside, the board sat waiting. They stood as I entered. For a moment, the silence was almost theatrical. The same silence that had once followed my resignation. Only this time, it wasn't pity. It was respect. I sat down, calm, composed. Ryan began talking, outlining problems, possible solutions, market losses. I listened quietly, taking notes, speaking only when necessary. And as I did, something shifted. The same people who once ignored my voice now hung on every word. Not because I spoke louder, but because life had proven me right. As days turned into weeks, I began to rebuild not just the structure, but the soul of the company. One process at a time, one decision at a time. People started working differently again, calmer, more focused. Order was returning. Ryan, meanwhile, began fading quietly into the background. His charm no longer fooled anyone. His speeches grew shorter, his confidence thinner. He started avoiding board meetings altogether. And one morning, I arrived to find an envelope on my desk, his resignation. No apology. No explanation. Just silence. The same silence I had once walked away in. I sat there for a long while, the letter in my hand, thinking how perfectly time balances its books. I didn't smile. I didn't cry. I just folded the paper and looked out the window at the sunrise breaking through the glass. The same glass I once walked past as an outsider. The irony was quiet. The justice was complete. And it wasn't revenge that made it beautiful, it was grace. But that wasn't the end. Because what came next was the day I truly returned. And when I did, they didn't laugh. They didn't speak. They just stood silent. Do you know what real power sounds like? It's not the sound of people cheering your name. It's not applause, not recognition, not fame. It's silence. The kind of silence that fills the room when those who once dismissed you now realize you were the one holding everything together. I've heard that silence twice in my life. Once when I walked away, and once when I returned. The first time, it was cruel. The second time, it was poetic. After Ryan's resignation, the board asked me to step in as interim head until they could stabilize the company. They offered me a grand title, more pay than I'd ever imagined. But I didn't want titles anymore. I just wanted control over what I built and the peace to do it right. So I accepted with conditions. No cameras. No press releases. No forced apologies. Just quiet rebuilding. For the next 6 months, I lived in that office, sometimes literally. The same walls that once felt cold and humiliating now carried a pulse again. I met every department, reviewed every broken system Ryan had modernized. He had replaced experience with noise, wisdom with trend words. It took time to undo it, patient, methodical time. I didn't yell. I didn't boast. I simply worked. And as I did, something strange began to happen. People started to believe again. Not in the company, in themselves. Every now and then, someone would quietly stop by my office door. "Mrs. Evans," they'd say softly, "we're glad you're back." Those small words meant more than any public award ever could, because they weren't spoken out of flattery, they were spoken out of relief. But outside those walls, rumors spread fast. People wanted to know what happened to Ryan Langford, the man who once stood on magazine covers with that flawless smile. The truth: he had vanished from the industry radar. His new startup proposals failed, his partners withdrew, and no investor wanted to take his calls anymore. The same people who once praised his vision now refused to associate with his name. That's how karma works. It doesn't strike like lightning. It erodes quietly, piece by piece, until all that's left is silence. One afternoon, I was leaving the building when I saw a familiar figure standing across the street. Rain was falling, steady, cold. He didn't have an umbrella, just a soaked coat and a look of someone carrying too many regrets. Ryan. He didn't cross the road. He didn't speak. He just nodded once, almost respectfully, and then turned away. And I realized that was his apology, silent, but real. I never saw him again after that. But his shadow lingered for a while in files, in old documents, in the quiet sighs of people remembering his chaos. I let it fade naturally. I never erased his name from the records. Let the world remember what happens when arrogance replaces respect. A few months later, a major international company approached us for a merger deal, a massive opportunity that could bring the company global recognition. It was poetic, almost circular. The same kind of contract Ryan had once chased, the one he had tried to sign, without my consent years ago. Only now, the board wanted me to handle it. They trusted me completely. This time, there was no arrogance in the room, just anticipation. As we prepared for the final meeting, I noticed the lead negotiator's name on the contract draft, and my hands froze for a second. Ryan Langford. He was now a middleman, working under another firm. Life has a sense of irony that even writers can't invent. When he entered the conference room the next day, his posture was different. No longer the charming executive in designer suits. He looked human, tired, polite, almost fragile. He didn't meet my eyes at first. When he finally did, it wasn't pride, it was humility. He cleared his throat. "Mrs. Evans," he said quietly. "It's been a while." "Yes," I replied. "It has." The room fell still. No one spoke for a moment. The sound of the clock ticking was the only thing between us. He began outlining the contract details with professional precision, keeping his tone neutral, businesslike. And I watched him, not with anger, not with bitterness, but with something deeper, closure. Every word he spoke now carried a weight I had never heard before. He was careful, cautious, almost deferential. It wasn't fear, it was respect born too late. When it came time for signatures, the irony was almost divine. The contract required two final approvals, his and mine. The same roles we once fought over. He signed first, his hand steady but slow. Then he slid the paper across the table toward me, his eyes quietly searching mine. And that's when I said it, softly, the words that had lived inside me for years. "The day I walked away, you laughed. And today, you stand silent." He didn't argue, didn't defend himself, just nodded, eyes heavy with understanding. And I signed. Not for revenge, not for power, but to finish the circle that life had drawn so perfectly. As the meeting ended, people began to file out. Ryan stayed behind, gathering his papers. Then, before leaving, he looked back one last time. "I'm sorry," he said, quietly, simply. I smiled faintly. "I know." And that was all. When I walked out of that room, the air felt different, lighter. Outside, sunlight broke through the clouds, scattering gold on the glass windows, the same windows I once saw through tears years ago. It felt symbolic, as if life itself had taken a deep breath and finally exhaled. That evening, I stood by the office balcony watching the city below. People rushing, horns blaring, time moving forward as it always does. And I thought about everything that had brought me here. The laughter, the humiliation. The nights I cried wondering if walking away had been a mistake. It hadn't been. It had been my beginning. See, life has this quiet way of teaching you, not through success, but through loss. You lose your place, your pride, your comfort, until all that's left is the truth of who you are. And once you see that truth, No one can take it away again. I didn't rebuild myself to prove Ryan wrong. I rebuilt myself because I finally realized I never needed anyone's permission to exist. And that realization, that's real freedom. Sometimes justice doesn't come as a loud victory. Sometimes it walks back into the same room that once broke you calmly, gracefully, and signs its own name on the line. That night, before leaving, I turned off the office lights. My reflection appeared faintly on the glass wall, older, wiser, calmer, and I whispered to myself, not in pride, but in gratitude. The day I walked away, they laughed. The day I returned, they stood silent. Then I locked the door behind me and stepped into the cool night air, knowing that I didn't just reclaim my company, I reclaimed myself.